All right, guys, well, welcome to week 11. We have Europe, America, and Oceania. So it's a big week, a lot going on with the High to Late Middle Ages, so let's get straight to it. Now, one of the big things that are going to happen is the Byzantine Empire is going to fall. Now, during the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire is kind of struggling right along. Under Belisarius and Justinian, during the height of the Byzantine Empire, you're going to see that it does formerly used to surround the Mediterranean Sea. Well, now during the late part, it's kind of being reduced to Anatolia, or reduced to the size of Turkey is today. Now, during the 11th century, the wealthy landowners are undermining the Thean system. Free peasants are becoming dependent, agricultural laborers. So the entire social structure and political structure is now starting to change, which is a huge issue. Now, from the West, we're seeing that Western Europe is going to be economically developing in a huge way. Urbanization is allowing more people opportunities to make money, being a merchant, being a craftsman, all these different types of things. The Normans and the Scandinavians are going to be pressing on the Byzantine Empire via the Mediterranean Sea. They're very effective sailors, which is going to threaten the Byzantines, as well as the Crusades. Europeans are sending hundreds of thousands of Christians to the Middle East to fight off the Muslims, and while they're there, they're sacking and taking over Byzantine Empire and threatening the Eastern Orthodox. Now, Constantinople will be eventually sacked in 1204, and it's going to come as a huge, huge blow to the Byzantine Empire. It will continue to exist. It won't fall until for another 200 years, but once it happens, it's a slow demise because it's 200 years, but it's significant for the fact that it never really recovers. Now, from the east, we're seeing that the Muslims are invading Anatolia. They are the ones challenging the food source, which is a big issue. We're also going to see that they are going to defeat the Byzantine Empire in 1071. Now, there is going to be a brief period of peace between the Muslims and the Byzantine Empire. However, in 1453, the Ottoman Turks are just going to come in and wipe them out. They're going to rename Constantinople Istanbul, which is where it gets its name today. Now, the Ottoman Turks are going to control formerly the Byzantine Empire, or what we would call Turkey today, until 1921, after the Great War. So it's a long time. Now, when we talk about the transitions from empires into city-states, all of a sudden Europe is going to start formulating boundaries. And eventually these boundaries are going to become formal lines dividing. So no longer are people going to be invading each other, coming up here very shortly, but we're seeing the transition from empires into states. Now, of course, you do see that we have the Holy Roman Empire, but we're going to see that's going to change. Now, speaking of the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire is going to be started by Otto I of Saxony. Now, he's going to take advantage of the decline of the Carolingian Empire. Now, the Carolingian Empire is the same empire of Charlemagne, Charles Martel, and as that empire is declining, Otto I is going to rise. Now, he's going to use his military to attack Eastern Europe and take over some of that area. He's also going to go to the aid of aid of the Roman Catholic Church a couple times, and this is going to win the Pope's favor, and eventually Pope John the 12th is going to name Otto Holy Roman Emperor. Now, he is going to get this title. Remember, Charlemagne is the first to be appointed with this title, but he's going to bring it back, this title, mostly for his service for the church. Now, when we talk about the Catholic Church, we're going to see there's a lot of tension going on in the Catholic Church. The investiture contest is when the Pope Gregory the Seventh wants to take over lay investiture, or he wants to appoint priests to be in charge of a king's church. Now, lay investiture is when a king gets to select who is the bishop of their church, who is the leader of the French Catholic Church, who is the leader of the English Catholic Church. They get to hand select them, and typically it's their priest growing up. So there's a relationship, there's a trust, there's a bond. Well, the Pope Gregory the Seventh believes that relationship kind of takes away from the authority of the Pope. So he wants to get rid of that relationship of the bishop and the king being very close, and he wants to replace those bishops with his own bishops and create a little spy ring so they can get inside information about what is really happening with the king instead of secondhand information. Now, if you were a king, you wouldn't want this to occur because that priest is your confidant. You know, they're the one person you're supposed to tell everything to be abolished for your sins, kind of planning all these different types of things. So we're going to see that Henry IV is going to stand up to the Pope and say, no, you can't do this. Absolutely not. And he refuses to allow his edict to happen in England. However, the Pope gets word of this, that Gregory is pissed that Henry won't allow his bishop to come in and rule, so he excommunicates Henry. Well, Henry goes out of his way in a crazy dramatic way, goes to the Pope, seeks out condolences, and the Pope eventually allows him to restore his excommunication. And with this, Gregory is dismissing the authority of the church, and Henry kind of is like, oh my God, seriously? I apologize, and then I'm going to heaven. Now, keep in mind, the excommunication is the most severe thing the Pope can do. It is God single-handedly saying that you are not going to heaven. And this tool being used by the Pope in this circumstance is going to show that the Pope is a political force as well as a religious force, but more importantly, that the Catholic Church is starting to be challenged by the kings. The kings are starting to rise, and they're starting to feel more powerful in their own countries, and this will allow future kings to start challenging the Pope. Now, the Germans are going to, people revolt especially, and this is going to force Henry IV to go back to Gregory III. Now, one of the big people who come out of the high to late Middle Ages is Frederick I, and he is going to attempt to absorb northern Italy. It's not going to go well for him, and he's going to eventually be forced down. Now, the reason why it's a big deal and why we care about him is because the popes are threatened by his political power, so the popes do whatever they can to shut him down. So, once again, our pope's authorities are reaching beyond the Catholic Church and into political matters, or not our secular matters. And this is going to be a continuing trend, which will eventually relate in the Protestant Revolution. Now, regional monarchies are going to start growing in power, specifically the French and the English. Now, Hugh Capet is going to be the last succeeding Carolingian emperor in 987, and he's going to kind of create the foundations of what would be a regional monarchy. Normans are going to attack. Now, the Normans are from Normandy, which is in France. They cross the English Channel and they go into England, and they conquer England by the name of William the Conqueror. He conquers England. He's the only person to ever do it in history, and he dominates the Anglo-Saxon and other Germanic groups in 1066. He's the first one to do it, and this is the beginning of the English monarchy. Now, Italy has a lot more issues going on. Okay, France is now kind of under a regional king. England's now under a regional king. Italy is still a hot mess. The reason why Italy is a mess is because they're making so much money with trade because of the Silk Road. They are having small little kingdoms and no unified force. Mostly still very much so reflecting city-states and principalities. Now, the Papal State is going to be directly in control by the Pope, and this is all like the Vatican Square. If you look at a map of Italy today, if you Google it, they still have the Papal States. The Pope controls everything that happens in those borders. By the 12th century, the city-states are going to start rejecting some of the Pope's authority. And eventually the Normans are going to invade southern Italy, and they're going to displace a lot of the Muslims and the Byzantines authorities. Now, on the Iberian Peninsula, which is where Spain and Portugal are, we have Muslims are going to start taking control from the 8th to the 12th century for about 400 years. From the 11th century on, Christian conquest of the Spanish Muslim territories is going to start occurring. We call this the Reconquista. When the Christians started taking back the Spanish-held lands in Spain. If you've ever been to southern Spain, it's a totally different architecture, totally different food style, totally different culture from like northern Madrid. And the reason is because of the 400 years of Muslim influence there. Now, one of the big things that are happening in Europe during this time is there's a huge improvement of food. We have less nomads invading. We have a lot of swamp and forests are being cleared. We have improved techniques like crop rotation, new crops, especially beans, horseshoes, horse collars, all of that are going to allow horses to be better than oxen, and they're much faster. Now, because we have more food means a larger population. With this larger population, we don't need as many people farming, so urbanization is going to occur when people start moving from farm or rural areas into cities. Now, in these cities, you can't just show up and people feed you. You have to have a certain types of skills. So once again, we start seeing a specialization of labor, specifically in textile production. People are no longer wanting to make their clothes. People want to start buying their clothes. Now, it's going to be a large-scale thing until the Industrial Revolution, but we started having textile production for the first time. Now, during this time, Mediterranean trade is increasing. The Italians are the ones dominating the Mediterranean Sea due to the Crusades. The Crusades lay the foundation for the Italians to dominate trade, and they continue to do so with their collaboration with the Muslims. Now, the Italian colonies are going to set up ports all around the Mediterranean and the Black Sea Basin, and this is going to allow them to continue to dominate. Now, one of the big parts that contribute to so much trade is the Hanseatic League, and this is going to increase trade in both the Baltic and the North Seas between Poland, Germany, and Scandinavia. Now, during the High to Late Middle Ages, trade is starting to really increase, which makes Western Europe much more competitive against Eastern Europe, and that's going to start rivaling. With more money coming into Western Europe, we're going to see technology increase, trade increase, as well as cultural increases. Now, with this increase of population, culture, economics, all this, we're going to see social changes. Now, the social stage, there's three major estates in Western Europe. The people who pray are clergy members, people who get paid to be a part of the church, those who fight, who are knights, and those who work, the peasants. Now, the fact is that there's more than just three people, but it's nice to kind of think of it. One of the big things about the High to Late Middle Ages is chivalry. It's a code of conduct for nobles. It is a patriarchal society, of course, and it sets up social roles, which make women have to be delicate, protected. It's also going to support Christian ideals, which is a huge reason why the church is going to push it so much. It's all about respecting God, living by God, following the church's rules without question, and following God's will. Now, a knight is supposed to dedicate their efforts to the promotion of Christianity and to the protection of women. By dedicating themselves to the protection of Christianity and the protection of women, a knight can earn their place in heaven, and that was their true role, is to make the world a safer place. Now, one of the other interesting things about the High to Late Middle Ages is the increased amount of troubadours, or poets, minstrels, and entertainers. These people are going around and writing down stories about what life is like and telling love stories and doing all those types of things. So we're starting to have a resurgence of literacy. We're starting to have a resurgence of writing and art and creation again. Now, they are going to use Muslim traditions of love poems, and they're going to use it and kind of make it in their new twist. They're also going to spread ideas about what it's oh my God, it's been a really long week, about what it's like for women to live and how to best honor your women and how to best honor your men. Now you're going to see the idea of romantic love and the refinement of European knights. So the idea of a knight in shining armor is going to be created during the High to Late Middle Ages. Now, independent cities are going to be happening. We're going to have the people who are going to start working, your artisans, your craftsmen, merchants, artisans, physicians, all those types of things are going to start popping up in the cities. Now, it's going to it's hard to kind of think of it in the social structure of feudalism, which is why they're mostly in the cities anyway. Now, towns are eventually going to demand charters of a greater self type of government. People don't like being told what to do, especially by nobles and all that stuff. Now, guilds are going to start popping up. Guilds are created by craftsmen and by merchants, and it is about organizing how much opportunity there are for all people to have exposure to certain types of things. It regulates how many people can be a craftsman, how many people can be a merchant, how many people can be an artisan, in order to ensure that there's business for everyone. It's kind of like a labor union. It's not quite, but it's kind of like a labor union. They do price and quality control as well as membership, and it creates a social support network. If you are in the, chair guild, you're trying to make sure that there's not too many people who make chairs and who are trying to sell chairs, and no one's trying to sell like super cheap chairs, and everything stays competitive. Because if everyone's competitive, then it works out best for everyone. Now, in these cities, women are going to have new economic opportunities. There's a lot less restraint on gender in cities. Now, please keep in mind, it is still, of course, a patriarchal society, especially when you have an idea like chivalry. However, they're going to have representation in all different types of trade. Now, they're never going to be a master of trade. However, they are going to be able to climb up the ladder of success to a degree. However, most women are going to be accepted into guilds. They are respected enough to be entered into guilds. And some actually are women only, which is pretty cool. Now, in addition to the growth of cities, we're going to have the growth of education. So one of the nicknames for the Middle Ages is called the Dark Ages, which scholars used to think there was nothing cultural or important or anything like that happening in the world. And that's just not quite the case during the Middle Ages. We have a lot of things going on. Education, culture, all of these things are. Now, is it as intense as it was during the Renaissance? Of course not, but it is still occurring. Now, cathedral schools are going to start up. European society was unstable to provide institutions of advanced learning, so churches are going to start setting up education in order to teach priests how to read, because they need to be able to read the Bible. Now, in the high to late Middle Ages, we're going to see that the more wealth people have, the more education they're going to have. A lot of your nobles are not going to get education because they don't need to, but a lot of your merchants, craftsmen, artisans, and stuff like that, because they're running businesses, not land, they are going to get educated. Curriculum is going to be Latin writings. You're going to have literature, philosophy, a little bit of law, some medicine, and theology. And they're all going to be based on the Catholic Church. Now, of course, once you start having small schools, you're going to, of course, have some universities pop up. And these academic guilds are going to start popping up in the 12th century. Both students and faculty are going to organize them. And with this is going to be higher education is going to start being promoted. It's going to be a good thing for society, of course. Now, Aristotle, who we talked about with the Roman Empire, with the Greek Empire, is going to be a huge source of academic foundations. Because the Byzantines protected all the Greek and all the Roman writings, we have a lot of this information. When the Byzantines came into power, remember, they thought of themselves as Romans, so they protected all of the scriptures, all of the writings, everything they could possibly get their hands on, they protected from the Roman Empire. With that being said, the Jews and the Muslim scholars are going to provide other translations from Arabic translations. So all of a sudden, we now have a cultural equality of essentially their sources. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas, he's a major proponent of scholasticism, and he's going to create the University of Paris, and this is going to be a huge foundation of learning for the world. Now, religion is going to become incredibly popular. It is going to be the central focus of life. It's going to be unaffected pretty much by scholasticism. They use learning about law, science, math, all of that in supporting their belief in Jesus Christ and God and all that stuff. There are 7 sacraments gain ritual popularity. Eucharist, eating the blood and the body, is going to start becoming popular. If you've ever been to a Catholic church, this is the blood of Jesus. This is, drink now. This is the body of Christ. Eat it, stuff like that. Virgin Mary is also going to be coming up as someone to pray to help and wash away your sins. That's going to be a big part. Now, we're going to start seeing a lot of religious movements are going to come out of it. St. Dominic and St. Francis create order of monks. These monks are going to have vows of poverty, and we're going to see that this is done in reaction to the evil ways they believe of the Catholic Church. We're going to start seeing religious zealots who oppose the hierarchical movements of having such power and influence. Now, we're also going to have a lot of heresy. We're going to have a lot of people really challenge the church. The government's going to mount campaigns to destroy both. A lot of destruction of art and culture and all that stuff's going to happen here. Now, the medieval expansion into Europe is going to occur. The Atlantic and the Baltic colonizations. You're going to have Scandinavians going to Iceland, Greenland, and Canada. However, the Canadian settlements aren't going to succeed for a while. Now, the King of Denmark is going to convert to Christianity for a little bit. Don't worry, they'll go back. And then Sweden and Finland are going to follow. All of these things are going to start happening. So we're going to see Christianity is just going to take on more power. Now, religious Christians are going to crusade back towards the Muslim Empire to get Jerusalem back under control because the Muslims are going to conquer it. We're going to see religious vows to opposition of Islam and paganism. We're going to see the development of people called the Templars who are going to go all the way to the Holy Land to try to deliver God's will. And they're going to found church and monasteries and all these different types of things. Now, during this time of the Crusades, we're going to see that the Sicily is going to be taken by the Muslims in the 9th century, and the Normans are going to reconquer it in the 11th century. And this is going to show that the Western Europe is starting to dominate. Before these reconquests, the Muslims dominate Europe. They technologically, academically, all of that stuff. They just wipe them out. However, now we're starting to see that Western Europe is starting to push back. Now, what's going to happen is we're going to see a lot more influence of the Christian church dictating much more military force, which you didn't see before. Now, like I said, the escalation of the Pope getting involved in secular issues or using their power to wield military as well as political influence on top of religious is that Pope Urban II is going to call for the liberation of Jerusalem. It was captured by the Muslims. And this is going to lead to the First Crusade. Now, the First Crusade is the only successful crusade. Christian crusaders are going to capture Jerusalem. However, it is then going to turn around in about 100 years and fall to Salah ad-Din, who is going to recapture Jerusalem. Now, Salah ad-Din is one of the greatest military leaders of all time, and the Muslim Empire will never lose control of Jerusalem and still surrounded by Muslim followers. It will never fall again. Now, the Muslim Empire is going to be attacked by Christians sailing from Italy. These crusaders are going to walk from England, France, Germany, wherever, walk to walk to Italy, and then from Italy they're going to board ships, and then they sail to the Middle East. Now, later crusades, you're going to see there's going to be 5 major ones. The Fourth Crusades, they destroy Constantinople, which allows the Muslims to come in and conquer it. You're also going to see that because of the Crusades, a lot more Christians are coming across the Muslim Empire and the Muslim ideals, which is going to lead to a cultural diffusion, which is great, and leads the foundation to the Silk Road. All right, so let's talk about Oceania and America. Now, before Christopher Columbus showed up to the Americas were developing completely independently from England, from Europe, Africa, and Asia. There was no contact. People really didn't know it was there. Now, societies are going to create very independently. Now, the first major Mesoamerican civilization is the Toltecs. They are going to be found in central Mexico. They are very much so warriors. We're going to see that they are going to migrate from northwest Mexico to central Mexico. And although they have a pretty good population of like 60,000 people, it's not that big. However, it is the first, which makes it a big deal. It is eventually going to fall because of internal strife or civil wars and nomadic incursions, or outsiders are attacking because they see a weaker civilization. Now, once the Toltecs fall, a little bit later, the Mexica are going to arrive. Now, the Mexica have this really amazing tradition of kidnapping women and seizing them. And what they did is they used this to finance the exploration and settlement of Tenochtitlan. Okay, later it will become Mexico City. Now, once they're in Mexico City, they start dredging the soil from the lake that surrounds this city, and they start making chipanas, or they float crops on the water, and this allows them to have about 7 crops a year, which allows their population to explode. The more food you have, the larger the population. Now, the Mexica are going to be the foundation. However, eventually, as it continues to conquer territory, it becomes the Aztec Empire. So if you are an Aztec, you're technically a Mexica. If you are a Mexica, you're the predecessors to the Aztecs. Now, Iztacotl, Montezuma the First are going to be massively powerful emperors. Now, Iztacotl is going to do the largest expansion, while Montezuma is going to have the most enforcement of tributaries. The expansion of the tributary system is what makes the Aztecs so unique. Everyone is paying the Aztecs, and that allows them to become a huge dominant force and allows them to become incredibly affluent. Now, they are going to join with other groups to form the Aztec Empire. Now, in Mexican society, it's a very hierarchy of social structures. Now, the highest stature is for soldiers. Now, a lot of these soldiers are going to come from the aristocratic class, mostly because of the land grants and the food privileges given to them. Now, there is a little bit of personal adornment as well. They're very well respected. Now, the interesting thing about the Mexico or the Aztecs with women is that it is absolutely a patriarchal society. Women have very little position in markets or anything like that. However, women's ability to bear children is what makes them really, really well respected. Childbearing, for instance, if a mother died in childbirth, they were considered like a warrior. If your son was a soldier, you were even more respected because you gave birth to a warrior. So warriors are highly, highly respected. Now, priests are going to be a huge class here in the Aztecs. They are used to reference omens, advisors. They are used as kind of the backbone of society, kind of like Egypt. They have ritual fractions, they read omens, and occasionally become rulers as well, depending on how popular they were. Now, your bottom class is going to be your cultivators and slaves. Now, there are things called communal groups, and they are originally families. However, they are going to work communal lands, and they are forced to work on your upper class's land as well. The slaves are typically debtors or children who are sold into slavery to clear debt. So either or could be used as slaves. They're not typically outsiders. Now, the Mexica religion is influenced by the indigenous traditions of the Olmecs. And remember, the Olmecs are period 1. They have the ritual ball game, which we don't know the rules, but people die. It's pretty cool. And they are known for their calendar, not as well as the Mayans, of course, but they do have 365 days. Okay. However, their ritual calendars were 260, so there's always something going on. This calendar revolves around the Mexican gods. Now, the smoking mirror is a powerful god of life and death and patron god of warriors. We're going to have arts and crafts and architecture is going to have a god. An H god is going to have an emphasis of blood sacrifice. He needs the blood. Now, bloodletting rituals have a huge influence on human sacrifices than predecessor cultures. They're going to kill people in order to honor their gods. Now, if you were a victim of this sacrificial ceremony, you had the tips of your fingers torn off before death. You would have ritual wounds. They'd cut you up and do all that stuff. They would cut out your heart and stuff like that. Personal rituals people used to do in order to honor their god is piercing of the penis, earlobes, and all these other really painful things just to show the god that they're of their sacrifice. Now, as we get to the Spanish arrival, we're going to talk about the Aztec bloodletting rituals a lot more because the Spanish took so many notes on it because they were fascinated. So we'll come back to that. Now, the people in the societies of the North, the Pueblo and the Navajo societies, what we call North America, are going to be eating maize or corn, 80% of their diet. They're going to have some permanent stone structures or adobe dwellings. We have about 125 throughout. Now, the Iroquois people are going to be settled communities in Mississippi, and the mound building are going to have ceremonial platforms. We don't really know that much about them because they have no writing systems. So because we have no written documents to tell us about the northern territories, we don't have that much information. For instance, the information we do get comes from archaeological evidence. And we're also going to see river routes are going to be exploited. We do know that. We do have some images. Now, there's no writing before the Spanish arrive. We're going to see that evidence is going to show that there is an Andean civilization, and we're going to start seeing that the Incans are going to develop there. Now, after the displacement of the Chavin and the Mochi societies, which are all in period 1, there's a huge kind of gap in regional government. However, we're going to have a rise of 2 smaller kingdoms that are going to eventually be united to form the Inca Empire, which are the kingdoms of Chuto and Shimyu. Now, the Inca Empire is going to form the Valley of Cusco, and it's going to have the capital city of Cusco, which is very kind of them to do that. And the most powerful leader is going to be ruler Pachuti, who is going to conquer a ton of territory in what we would call today Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. And they're going to have a population of 11.5 million, which is a huge population, even in today's terms, and it's one of the largest in the world. So keep in mind, yes, these are the Americas, yes, we don't have that many written language, but they are doing incredible things. One of the unique things about the Incan Empire is the Quipu. Now, keep in mind, there's no written language in the Americas until the Spanish arrive. However, the Incans, who are so effective governmental-wise, they keep track of counting or accounting systems by using the Quipu, which is a system of chords and knots. It's used as a mnemonic aid to help people remember things because they're not writing things down. Now, Cusco is the capital of the Incan Empire. It's going to have your highest level of people. You're going to have some gold on the facades of buildings, which is going to entice the Spanish when they see them. You're also going to have the Incans are going to be building roads throughout everywhere. Now, the roads are going to be used to increase military effectiveness. They're going to be used to use as a couriering system. They are going to pave and shade wide roads. That's how effective they are. And they do about 10,000 miles of roads, both mountain and a coastal route. So depending on what the need was would dictate what type of road had to be there. These roads are also going to allow courier systems to develop. These are very similar to that of the Greeks and the Persians. Now, the religion that's going to be happening is going to be the infallible king. The king is perfect. Everything they do is wonderful and godlike. Now, they're going to have a lot of ancestral worship. You're going to have a lot of very powerful family members are going to be mummified. They regularly consulted the mummified ancestors in order to help. Sacrifices were offered, and we're going to have major festivals in which the mummified bodies are going to be presented in a sense of honor. Now, we're going to see that there's a lot of peasants who are going to be organized into communal groups. The government owns the land, and the people use the land and benefit from the land, but they don't own the land. The government does. Now, land tools are held communally. Mandatory work detail on land as well as public works. So we have this new system called Mita system that requires all people to pay a tax of labor. Now, the Incan religion is the Intu sun god is going to be the big one. And they have temples that people make pilgrimages to, and they're going to believe that sin is a disruption of the divine order. So doing the wrong thing is going to see as a huge disaster. Now, in Oceania, we're going to have nomadic foragers of Australia. We're going to see that people are going around and looking for food, but they're not farming, which is unique. In New Guinea, we're going to start seeing pigs are going to be starting being herded. Root cultivation is going to start happening. We're going to have some small-scale trade of surplus food, some goods, mostly oysters, shells, spears, boomerangs, stuff like that. Here's what a boomerang looks like in case you didn't know. Now, in Oceania, we're going to have cultural and religion is going to be tied to the environment. There's a lot of myths and stories to explain all of the things that are happening with the weather, the way the world works, and stuff like that. However, most of the rituals are going to be based around food. Obviously, food is very, very cherished. There's not much of it. So, when we talk about Oceania, we're talking about Micronesia, Malaysia, Polynesia, Australia, New Guinea, New Zealand, all these places. Now, the development of the Pacific Island societies are going to establish almost in all islands in the early centuries. Now, trade between these islands groups are going to increase, and we're going to start seeing long-distance voyaging on a continuing basis. Now, these long-distance voyages are going to bring sweet potatoes from South America, and we're going to start seeing that these voyagers are going to preserve in oral traditions. Now, the population is going to grow with extensive cultivation. The more skills that they increase their food production, specifically by fishing, would allow the population to grow. However, we are going to note that there is fierce fighting between the tribes and cannibalism. So when life gets tough, start eating people, I guess. Now, with the development of social classes, you have high chiefs, lesser chief, commoners, artisans, peasants, which means it's a pretty complex system, which makes it very, very hard for people to kind of understand exactly what they're doing. Now, with these small multi-island empires, they're going to not be very well organized, and you're going to have some military conscription, or everyone is forced to serve in the military. Now, when we talk about the Polynesian religion, we're going to see the priests are intermediate to the divine. So priests can speak to the gods. Gods of war, agriculture are the most prominent because you had to protect your people as well as food source, obviously. And there are temples or ceremonial spots. So anyway, guys, that's the end of the week. I know a little quick. I'm not feeling well. Please don't judge me too harshly. Anyway, have a great week, and we'll see you in class. See ya.